You're not getting a song. We're doing a response video. This will be something of a different response video for me. I'm usually taking on the weak sauce arguments of liberals, but today I'll be commenting on a recent video by a fellow leftist, one Kelly Zahos. Though, to be clear, she's called me a liberal more than once and seems to have disdain for the concept of the left itself, so I doubt she views me as a fellow leftist. Anyway, Kelly put out a video on June 13th that addressed a Twitter shitstorm she was at the center of back in May. As always, I suggest you watch that video first. However, this time, I would say that is essential, because I will not be including the vast majority of it in this video. For starters, the video itself is 25 minutes long, and I don't want to make another hour-long response. For seconders, Kelly is notoriously verbose, and she is versed in theoretical concepts that I am not. She's got me there, I guess. I work 40 to 50 hours a week. I make these videos in a D&D campaign. I have a fiance. I do most of the cooking and the shopping. I just moved and I don't really have time to read. I'm working my way through Capital. Get off my back. The core of her video, as I see it, is using her canceling, or I guess we're calling the manager now, to critique the identity politics of the left and quoting some dodgy characters to advocate for what seems to be a kind of post-left Marxism. She says some things I agree with, she says some things I disagree with, and the thought of critiquing the whole thing leaves me spiritually exhausted. Like I said before, it would frankly be best for you to watch it yourself and draw your own conclusions. What I want to address is the way she misrepresents what actually happened over the 3 days she sustained a meltdown before Twitter suspended her account. Though, she does have an old Twitter account that's been abandoned since 2016, where she said a lot of cringy lib shit. Or maybe she was being ironic, I don't know. But who didn't say cringy lib shit in 2016, am I right? Anyway, the way she frames the Twitter spiral that happened between May 25th and May 27th is that she made a couple of rough around the edges tweets, and a bunch of trans activists came pouring out of the woodwork to slander her as a fascist and a TERF. Now, this is such a gross oversimplification of what happened that it is absolutely a lie of omission. I get why she did this. She had a point she wanted to make, and telling the whole story would distract from that. So anyway, let's start at the beginning. The brunt of the kerfuffle began on May 25th when she tweeted, "You know what will really build leftist power? Getting working-class cisgender women fired from their jobs for having the opinion that trans women aren't women." Okay, so she was trying to make a point here. That point, to put it succinctly, is that when we categorize people as being essentially bad and therefore deserving of punishment based on the political views they have, we're doing the work of the ruling class by keeping the working class divided, all while giving ourselves the positive feels associated with fighting our enemies, even though our true enemy is the ruling class. And I agree with this. In a vacuum. If you're not familiar with this sort of anti-cancel culture analysis, you may miss this forest for the trees. But the trees in this instance are fucking sequoias. First, let's pluck that low-hanging fruit that she so graciously put in all caps for us. Trans women aren't women is an opinion, in the same way that allowing women to fuck freely destroys Western civilization is an opinion, or Jews control the banks is an opinion. It's not. These are all demonstrably false statements based on outdated ways of viewing the world, and framing any of them as just another opinion provides cover for reactionary views. The "it's just my opinion" defense is so frequently used to cover for hateful ideas that it's virtually ubiquitous, and just as ridiculous as when "they hate our freedom" was used to answer the question of why 9/11 happened as an attempt to cover for the economic, political, and military skull-fucking the US and its allies had been doing to the Middle East for a century. Second, let's provide some context and discuss the event that she is very clearly talking about, because obviously this statement is referencing something. It didn't just come out of nowhere. What this tweet is almost certainly about is the case of one Maya Forstater. Forstater? I don't care. Kelly didn't name her in the original tweet, but she did go on to cite her, and Maya is basically the only prominent example of anything remotely like this. However, last year Maya was not fired from her job at the Center for Global Development, a think tank with the most neoliberal name ever, based in the UK and Washington, D.C. Maya simply did not have her contract renewed after she gained some notoriety for very publicly holding some transphobic views. In response to this, she sued the CGD, claiming that her bigotry was protected under the Equality Act of 2010. In December, the judge in that case ruled that her bigotry was not protected, calling her views absolutist. Maya is the literal definition of a TERF, or trans-exclusionary radical feminist for those not in the know, a term coined by radical feminists who exclude trans women from their analysis. However, they are definitely not radical, and I 100% agree with Corvidae that TERF should stand for trans-exclusionary reactionary feminist, since that's a far more accurate description of their beliefs. Maya calls her views gender critical, which is another term coined by TERFs to describe their beliefs, much like how white nationalists started calling themselves race realists when everyone caught onto their shit. And while Maya herself is upper-class neoliberal scum, there are a lot of working-class people who believe, by default, the things Maya does. Transphobia is ingrained in society, and all of us are eating from the trash can of ideology, but Maya is both ideologically committed and misappropriating the language of feminism to make her bigotry sound like activism. And since the vast majority of trans people are working class, it is in fact Maya who is trying to divide the working class along identity lines. Working class cis women have far more in common with working class trans women than they do with Maya Forstater. And I know this. And TERFs know this, because they keep lying and saying she was fired. Getting fired is something that working class people can relate to, while not getting your contract renewed at an international think tank is not. If TERFs spread the actual truth, working class people would likely tell them to go fucking cry about it. In fact, it is still possible that someone in the UK who said the same things Maya did could actually be fired and win a lawsuit, since that would be a challenge to the Gender Recognition Act by way of the Employment Rights Act of 1996, which is something that has yet to be tested. And Kelly had ample opportunity to learn this before she said anything, and as someone with a platform, she does have something of a responsibility to learn the whole truth before she comments on something. But that's fine. People don't need to jump down her throat and call her a TERF and a fascist for that, right? All you need to do is explain to her that her rhetoric is providing cover for bigotry. And for the most part, that's what people did. The first time she ran defense for a TERF. A few months before this, when Arielle Scarcella, yet another ideologically committed transphobe who uses the language of feminism to justify her views, released her Why I'm Leaving the Left video, Kelly made a similar argument. She said that calling her a TERF and essentializing her will hardly make anyone on the fence come running to the punitive arms of the left. And again, I have to stress that I agree with this in most context. Bippity Burke, punishment doesn't work. Calling your uncle who voted for Trump a fascist is probably not going to win over anyone in your family, but your uncle is not someone who made a career out of using their identity to demonize trans folks and basically anyone vaguely to the left of Rand Paul. At least, I don't think your uncle does that. When folks like Corvidae replied to her to explain Arielle's extreme bigoted history, Kelly simply doubled down and refused to give an inch or seemingly listen to anyone, at one point calling Arielle a banal liberal. This, of course, highlights the need to call out and identify TERFs and their rhetoric, because Arielle, being just a normal lesbian woman with some controversial takes, is exactly what she wants you to think. It's the "it's just my opinion" dodge as a performance. Now, before this, I had never heard of Arielle Scarcella, and I assumed that Kelly hadn't either, and that's fine. Oh, to be free of the knowledge of Arielle Scarcella's existence once more. But you should research a subject before you comment on it, and if you miss crucial details and people correct you, you should take it in stride. Kelly didn't seem to do the former, and she certainly didn't do the latter. Instead, she kept doubling down and arguing around people and blocking a number of trans and non-binary folks who were simply trying to inform her in good faith. Obviously, some people showed up simply to harass her, but from what I saw, the vast majority of people were trying to engage with her in good faith. Sheep in the Box did a very good series on Arielle Scarcella. If you want to know more, if you don't want to know more about Arielle Scarcella, you should go watch Sheep in the Box anyway, but just pick a different video. But that brings us up to May 25th. Armed with the foreknowledge that their best attempts to engage with her would not work, and the language of the tweet showing that she had dug her heels in on the subject, and in all likelihood had been listening to TERFs on the subject of Maya Forstater, trans folks saw no need to play nice. So they didn't. This led to a solid 3 days of Kelly going full meltdown May and lashing out at anyone who criticized her. This culminated in a truly exquisite response from the chud-busting skull himself, Sean. She responded to this single 3-word response, and an obvious troll to boot 7 times over the next 24 hours or so. 8 if you count the video, I guess, becoming progressively more and more vitriolic, and by the end of it she was using slurs and calling non-binary person gross, which I don't have receipts for, but here she is calling them unappealing. She referred to the riots as a mob of young black men burning shit down, said that it was quite true that most US queer spaces are hostile, abusive, and xenophobic, did a "did you just assume my gender" joke, and accused Alice Quinn Rose of basically only caring about trans issues. And in the course of this, she lost about a quarter of her Twitter followers, which she blames on the 3 words Sean said to her rather than the 72-hour meltdown, and eventually her account got suspended. So I guess Twitter is her manager? I don't know. And of course, during this time, I too felt the need to say something to Kelly. See, I had noticed she had been frequently conflating anarchism and liberalism over the preceding months, and when she did it again, I goaded her into stating flat out that she believes anarchism is just liberalism, and then she called me a moralizer and told me to get fucked. Which is fair, I guess, though I don't see how I was moralizing. What is moralizing? Is that like virtue signaling or something? But the doozy of a tweet that I want to talk about is conveniently enough the second one she showed in her video.
Let's move on to this critique, which got everyone particularly infuriated. And sure, it was a little rough around the edges, right? Not the kind of thing that is typically on script for liberal social justice spaces. But what did I really mean by it? Well, we are all neoliberal subjects, and the reason that the socialist left was much more fervent in its application of identity politics around gender ideology between the 2016 Bernie campaign and the 2020 campaign is because their class position within the elite became more precarious, so they had to scrounge around for social capital to make up for their downward mobility. Now, this analysis absolutely does not denigrate trans people, nor deny their validity, nor is it making any statements against any specific rights they may be campaigning for.
Okay, so let's talk about how this denigrates trans people and invalidates their identities, something Kelly absolutely does not get to decide. Firstly, the term gender ideology is almost exclusively used by transphobes to refer to any belief outside of there being 2 genders that are inseparable from sex. Now, I understand that Kelly is not using the colloquial definition of ideology as an individual set of beliefs, but is instead using a Marxist one, but that is not relevant to my point. Gender ideology may be a useful phrase for making her point, but the TERFs already own this one. I'm sorry. This co-opting of rhetoric by the right happens all the time. Political correctness was once a left-wing concept, one Slavoj Žižek uses to this day. It meant any language that obfuscates power dynamics. A great example of this would be how Walmart calls their employees associates, implying some sort of equality between the company and its workers. Unfortunately, if you go onto Twitter and wail about political correctness, people will assume you mean not being able to say the N-word, and if you rail against gender ideology while a bunch of trans people are criticizing you for regurgitating TERF talking points, people are going to assume you're a TERF. And that is just the first 4 words. She goes on to say that anyone and everyone can conjure up a special identity, which is just, without question, implying trans people are just making shit up, and is just about the most invalidating statement you can make. Next, we'll take a brief moment to enjoy her insinuating that Black Lives Matter is passé literally the day before the largest series of protests in that movement's history broke out. Nice. Yeah, that's nice. Then we move on to the last bit of the tweet. It is really hard to see this as anything other than Kelly calling trans and non-binary folks mentally ill, which is not only a double whammy of transphobia and ableism, but calling LGBTQ people mentally ill is on the list of things everyone vaguely to the left knows not to do, right up there with saying Stalin did nothing wrong and comparing brown folks to animals. The charitable interpretation of this tweet is that she has no idea what she's talking about, and her explanation of what she meant definitely reinforces this idea. Her claim that the socialist left became more fervent in its application of identity politics around gender after 2016 as an effort to scrounge for social capital is, let's say, an incomplete analysis. For starters, compared to what? The The socialist left, here in the States at least, was basically non-existent before 2016. This almost completely ignores the history of the LGBTQ rights movement, which had just landed a major win in 2015, securing marriage equality in all 50 states. This made the cutting edge of this movement, us trans folks, since not only were we only just beginning to be a part of the public discourse, we also have the fewest institutional protections. And the right wing knew this, so they started trying to pass bathroom bills and whatnot, making gender identity the front lines of this fight. And then a fascist was elected president. And boy, that sure did have an effect over the last 4 years and the application of identity politics. Also, in case no one noticed, the socialist left is chock full of trans people. It is packed to the brim with us. Have you ever gone into a Discord server and just scrolled through the Your Pronouns channel? It's like 40% trans folks at least. We have skin in this game. Many of us have nowhere else to go where we can be ourselves, and it is potentially a very real matter of life and death for many of us. We will be fervent. And yes, I know, none of us are immune to the dominant ideology. We are all seeking social capital. We simply can't not do it. I'm doing it right now. Kelly did it in her video. Some of you are doing it down in the comments. But to say it's the reason that gender identity issues are so prominent on the socialist left is so extremely reductive. But of course, the least charitable interpretation of this tweet is that instead of just not knowing what she's talking about, she crafted this with the intention of explicitly hurting those who were criticizing her. Of course, the two aren't mutually exclusive. Okay, let's flip it. Kelly, the words you say simply have consequences, and I don't mean for you. People say bigoted shit all the time and never see any consequences. What I mean is that they have consequences for those around you, particularly the most marginalized members of the working class. This isn't some threat of punishment. Everyone is ignorant of most things, and I don't think that we need to throw people into the gulags for having very commonplace ignorance. Though in the glorious workers' utopia, we will be considering re-education camps for brocialists. Kelly, people came at you because you were spreading transphobic talking points and misinformation, not because you had an opinion they disagreed with. And they kept coming at you, and you drew the attention of Sean and ended up losing about 1,000 Twitter followers because instead of taking criticism, you kept doubling down and just being a fucking asshole for 3 whole days. By the end of it, I seriously doubt anyone knew or cared what your original point was in the first place. For the love of God, Kelly, you're supposed to be a socialist communicator. Fucking communicate. There are people with very similar politics to yours who have no trouble communicating them perfectly clearly. Michael Brooks, as an example, someone who I'm quite a fan of, has a very similar critique of woke culture, and while I don't always agree with him, I do always understand him, and he's never had to resort to slurs or word salad, and he's smart enough to know not to use right-wing rhetoric and muddy the waters what he means. I mean, look, the social contract's pretty fucking simple. Don't be an asshole. And if you are an asshole, apologize. I apologize for being an asshole all the fucking time. You wouldn't have even had to concede your point that punitive measures are alienating, unproductive, and ultimately only serve the interests of bosses. Fucking A. You're right. Outside of cases of actual, workplace safety, I found it hard to believe that anyone on the left would actually disagree with you if you communicated your fucking point clearly. Just admit you did a whoopsie for spreading TERF talking points and misinformation. I don't think you're a TERF, Kelly. I'm not convinced that you're what I would call an ideologically committed transphobe. I mean, we're all transphobic in the same sense that we're all liberals, but there's a difference between that and being ideologically committed. And that is a distinction that you either don't see or don't think is important, as indicated by this tweet that got a little buried in the kerfuffle. You are right that most people don't believe these things, but that is by default. Most of these people have never met a trans person before, and in my experience, only the most hardened bigots refuse to change their views on gender when they are exposed to trans people, and those people are not as numerous as they seem. Trans people cannot agree to disagree with TERFs any more than Jewish folks can agree to disagree with Nazis, and black people can agree to disagree with the KKK. We cannot coexist with people who want us to stop existing. I also think it's technically incorrect to call you a TERF because you're not using feminism to spread transphobia. You're definitely not using feminism. You're using class analysis, which frankly may be worse. And yes, you are spreading transphobia regardless of your intentions. I care fuck all about intentions. I care about actions. And this narrative of calling the manager is a fucking slimy way of implying that trans people are weak and need to be coddled by authority. The truth is that by the end of this whole fiasco, your critics just stood up to a thin-skinned, whack-ass bully all on their own. And yeah, you're going to say my mode is liberal, I have contempt for the working class, or maybe you'll just call me gross or unappealing. I don't know. I don't care. Your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen what makes you cheer. You may not be an actual TERF, but you've definitely been listening to some transphobic-ass people based solely off of your talking points around this issue. Couple that with the fact that you've been generally just dismissive, at the least, of your trans critics, and your weaponization of that transphobic rhetoric against them. It's pretty clear why people are so pissed off at you. And it ain't your fucking opinions.
When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back. Get mad. I don't want your damn lemons. What am I supposed to do with these?
Take the lemons.
Demand to see life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemon.
Oh, I like this guy.
I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your